You're visiting the Mom Next Door and our stories of faith. I'm glad you dropped by for a visit. Please stay a while and hear what the Lord has done in the lives of moms just like you and me. Oh, well, this is going to be such a fun time today. Hi, friends, and welcome to the neighborhood. You have joined the Mom Next Door Stories of Faith. I love broadening my circle of friends and getting a chance to share them with you. I know each person that we meet with holds a special purpose. I want to introduce you to Maureen Miller. In 2023, we were both contributing authors to Life in the Estrogen Free Zone and Renewed Christmas Blessings. I'm going to put the links for those in the show notes so you can go pop on over there and get a hold of them. Those books were my introduction into the publishing world. But Maureen, not you. You do a lot of writing. That was not your first rodeo. So I would love to just throw out the anchor and give you an opportunity to introduce yourself, maybe your interest in writing, or also your introduction and moving into parenthood.
Oh, wow. It's so good to be with you. And thank you for having me. I have been writing professionally for a number of years and just find such joy in quieting myself enough to ask the Lord to prompt my heart on the messages that He might have for a listening world. And I say listening as in the spoken word is important, but we also listen through the written words, don't we? So
Yeah.
being able to live with eyes open and ears open to hear God's messages in His created world is something I love. And I think it speaks to His just extraordinary character, oftentimes in just the ordinary things. And so I've been writing for a number of years collaboratively. I find great joy in writing as a team member and encouraging other writers and promoting other people's works. So that's just a joy to me as well. I love that role as an encourager. I am finishing up and hoping to see my first solo work, a novel called Gideon's Book, that's due to release in the spring of next year. So that will be a lot of fun. And it's a story that really speaks my heart, which we'll get into maybe just a little bit later. But I'm an adoptive mother of 3 children, and my oldest son is a father of 3 daughters. So I have 3 beautiful grandgirls. I
Okay.
have suffered loss of 2 failed adoptions over the course of 26 years. And so I know the heartache that comes with that as
Mm,
well.
yeah.
But God has been so good and faithful to me. I love the role as mother, even at this stage in my life where my youngest is 15 and a sophomore in high
Okay.
school. And she's
Okay. I was wondering.
and then I have his 26 and a 25-year-old sons. And they're
Okay.
one of those sons is the one I wrote about in the book that we were collaborating with Michelle Rayburn, the Life in the Estrogen Free Zone. So God is good and He is faithful.
So many great boy mom stories in that book. It's like light reading and reading where you could like pick up, read a chapter while you're nursing a baby and it lets you know, hey, this is what's coming, ladies.
Right.
So, how did you come to faith?
I'm I am so blessed. And I think the older I get and the longer I've journeyed with Jesus, I take such joy in the fact that I was raised in a home where Jesus was central. And it wasn't a perfect home by any means. My mom and dad have celebrated 57 years of marriage, imperfect
Wow.
love, but beautiful, beautiful love. And my mom and dad, I could honestly say from my earliest memories, they include Jesus. I would
Mm.
say as a toddler, hearing my mom sing songs like Jesus Loves Me and Jesus Tender Shepherd at my bedside before praying with me before bedtime, they made church and being part of a community of believers an important thing. We went to a good Bible based church growing up, and that was always encouraged. So I came to faith probably at I think 4 was the age. I've never been able to find documentation of the exact age, but
Right.
I was baptized when I was 12 and then reaffirmed. I was christened as a child. My mom was of the Lutheran faith. And then I was baptized at 12 as a young choosing girl. So that was a blessing as well. And so just grew up in the church and came to faith at a very young age.
I have a friend who said, my story doesn't really have much to tell. I've just always walked with God. I don't have any drama to share or trauma to share. So my story would be terribly boring. And then I think, oh my goodness, how rich and how beautiful it is to have the testimony as one who has walked with the Lord for all those years. And so I don't think we should ever think that the story is not worth sharing, but beautiful that God has walked with you and you have responded to him throughout your life.
But I can say I understand that particular woman's words because I used to feel them. But then I realized that there's so much beauty too. And yes, walking with Jesus for a very long time, but then also going through difficult times that were traumatic, dramatic, where we walked away from Jesus. And just because I've known him a very long time and walked with him for a very long time, there were seasons of my life where I was choosing my own way. And the consequences of that are part of my story now and the beautiful mosaic
Yeah.
of the brokenness where God made something beautiful. I'm a very firm believer in Romans 8:28 that he will take all things and work them together
Mm.
for good for them that love him and are called according to his purposes. He does not waste a suffering.
Well, what did those times look like?
I was very young when I started dating a young man that is now my husband of 35 years. So we have journeyed a long time together. I was 13 and he was 14 when we began going together. The story my dad likes to
Wow.
I told Maureen she could not date till she was 16, but she brought Billy home at 13 and he just never left. So we had a very strong friendship and a very, I believe, a true love from a very early age. And we were from a small town in Ohio, grew up in a very small community, a very small school, kind of a cute little snippet. I'm a Miller who married a Miller, so I never changed my name. And kids love to tease me in junior high, you're going to get married and you won't have to change your name. But with dating or becoming friends with the opposite sex at such an early age, we began in high school to make some poor choices and to walk the way of the world, which is to allow
Yeah.
sin to enter into our relationship. And I was quite young when I became sexually active. And I remember there was a time when I was probably 16 where I thought I was pregnant. And I remember my now husband, my boyfriend at the time, Bill and I talking about that. We were sitting out on a street lamp lighted street, his street in front of his house, and I shared with him my fears. And at that time, we really considered what we would do if that were true. And we toyed with the idea of having an abortion. Even though we'd been together for quite a while at that point, and even though we had parents that would not have wanted that, but would have been devastated by that news, we knew that we probably could make our own decision. And there was a pretty dark time where I thought, this is something that I may have to consider, even though I really thought of myself as someone who promoted and would call myself pro-life.
Yeah.
Um, we had dreams and things that we thought a pregnancy would thwart. And as it turned out, I was not pregnant and I did not have to make that choice. But there was something extremely, I think, damaging about toying with the notion of going against something that was so rooted in my values. And
Mm.
I think we've probably all been there in different ways where we say we believe one thing, but then when it comes up to our personal experience, we consider the opposite.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the reality, personal experience when you're face to face with a situation and you're like, wow, I didn't realize it would be so hard.
Yes, exactly. And like anybody would know, if you walk with Jesus, you know that sin separates us from him. It's never that Jesus walks away, but when we walk away from him, he's always there, but sin separates us in some ways. And so in my high school years and probably well into my early 20s, I began to really see myself because of the lie that I was living, because on to all others accounts of me, I was walking a godly life and making good choices. Very few knew of the choices I was making with my boyfriend. And I began to have some disillusionment, I think, because of the lies that I was living. And so I began to see myself as someone always on the outside looking
Mm.
in. And there was a very pivotal time in my early 20s where the Lord healed that vision. But I will say that for many years, from probably about the age of 16 or 17 until maybe 21, 22, I had this mental picture of myself going to a window, looking in and seeing what I considered life going on inside, and feeling and hearing the emotion and the words of the enemy saying, "You're left out. You'll never know
Mm,
what normalcy is. You'll never know what it means to be apart." And I lived in that kind of illusion and lie for a very, very long
mm,
time until the Lord healed me in the early 1990s.
yeah, seeing through that window and thinking you're not a part of that. You won't be a part of that.
Yes.
Oh, the enemy just really does want to lead us astray and lead us to lies that then just put us in this spiral. So
Yeah.
how did you overcome that?
So I was newly married. My husband and I married in 1989, and we were living in Lexington, Kentucky at the time. He was in medical school, or getting ready for medical school, I should say. He was working in a chemical lab. And I knew enough from my upbringing to, in your darkest times, to seek the
Yeah.
Lord. So
Yeah.
I had kind of hit rock bottom, and marriage wasn't giving us all the answers that we wanted, and I was kind of in just a dark place. And so I began to really sit in a quiet place and seek the Lord, really coming with nothing but, "I don't even know what to say, I don't even know what to do, but I'm here
Mm,
and I want you to speak." And as I began to do that and make that part of my routine, the Lord began to speak into my heart just his promises, the things that the word that I had hidden in my heart from long ago, like we read in Psalm
mm,
119. It began to become afresh to me. And one morning in the winter of the early 1991 or two, I heard the Lord say, "Return to the window." And I could not fathom how someone who was good and loving could ask me to return to a place that I considered painful and
mm,
steeped in lies. But I'd come at least in the days and weeks of sitting with him in quietness and rest. I trusted him enough to obey. And so I returned to that window in my mind, and I stood once again on tiptoe, looking in at what I considered normalcy. And this time I heard two words: turn around. It was as simple as that. And I'd never even considered. I would go to the picture in my mind and I would just kind of leave without seeing anything else. But in
mm,
this moment, the Lord just said, "Turn around." And so I did a 180, and I saw what I can only describe as the picture of freedom. To me, it was just a beautiful rolling countryside with blue sky and puffy clouds and butterflies. And the Lord spoke to me in that moment and just said, "You are free in me. Keep your eyes on me, not on yourself or others. Walk with
mm,
me, and I will walk you into that freedom that I have promised." And there's several parts to this story, but for this time, I can simply say that there was part of that image. It was so beautiful, and he later brought clarity, which kind of brought me into my purpose as a writer. In that moment of turning around, I saw myself chasing butterflies with a net, and I didn't there were years where I didn't really understand why I would chase butterflies with a net, because that's for collecting butterflies. And I'm an animal lover and I write about animals. But one day, some years after this initial introduction to this freedom, the Lord revealed to me what the net was. And he said to me that you are not created to destroy, but to give life. And I have a purpose. The net represents words, spoken and written. And when you capture a woman in particular with your words, you hold them for a moment to release them to greater freedom. And it was a way for him to really show me not only my ministry, which is primarily to help other Christian women, those who've already been born into new life, like a butterfly, but to help them understand that this is a common thing. I've found there are many Christian women who live in this disillusionment that somehow they're not a part of, or they stand outside of. But he very specifically said he would use the written and spoken words that he gave me to help release Christian women to greater freedom. And that was just a beautiful way of helping me hone into my ministry and my purpose.
mm. The idea of reminding them that they belong. But, what's interesting if I'm picturing, standing looking at that window, like you longed for what was in that window. And I could see that as being very limiting, where instead the turnaround, what God has for us can be so great. And how, that's probably part of the comparison game when we see the windows of everybody else's life and we see expectations that we have that we've created in our own mind, like, oh, that's where I want to be. That's it. Like, if I could only get on the other side of that window. And then in the quietness, God spoke to you and said, the true freedom is found by doing what I've got and by stepping into where I've got for you. You just need to turn around. I think that's remarkable.
You're exactly right about the limited nature of looking in a window. And there was another portion to this vision that the Lord showed me later, which has to do with my ministry with Christian women, because when he asked me to acknowledge the kind of window I was looking in a stained glass window into church. And so what I was seeing is the perfection that I considered all these Christian women going about their business and ministries, but I wasn't a part. And so these what I'm sharing with you happened in 3 or 4 different times with the Lord over many years. But it really was so beautiful the way the Lord kind of honed in my healing and
Mm.
then my audience and then my specific ministry over time. And as we get into this a little bit more, you'll maybe understand, and your listeners will understand more how, even more specifically, there were things coming down the pike from that early 1990s that I was unaware were going to happen, that were going to be more devastating blows, but that further helped me understand my ministry.
Recently, I have been reminded how important it is to be still, silent, and really sit in solitude to allow the Lord to speak to us. We get so busy with life, and it sounds like those were, you're busy with life day to day, but we do have to throw out the anchor from time to time and just ask the Lord to lead us. What does he want to show us? And then obey.
Yes. And I think that's key, what you just said, obey. We don't always understand what God is asking us to do, but if we sit in that solitude and we learn enough of his character, we come to trust him. So no matter what he asks us to do, like Peter stepping out of the boat went against all logic. We are asked to do hard things, but when we know Jesus and his character, when we know God and his character, we can step into anything in obedience and experience the joy that comes from that obedience.
Well, there were some things that came down the pike later, and you couldn't have foreseen that. Can you tell me a little bit more about those things?
Oh, yes. So in this season in early 1990s where I began to just appreciate and relish, really delight in those times with the Lord that were, as you mentioned, those times of solitude and rest. And he began to speak into the broken places in my life and mend them and heal me. He was preparing me for some difficulties that were coming very shortly thereafter. It wasn't long after that, maybe a couple years, that my husband and I learned that we were, boy, a miracle, never going to be able to have children biologically. And there were times where I really thought that perhaps some of our sinful choices from the past were they resulted in this kind of punishment of infertility.
Mm,
And of course, I
mm.
learned over time that that's not how God works. Yes, there are natural consequences to our sin, and sometimes those are physical consequences. But God wasn't punishing us for our past sins. But in all of that, I can see that He was preparing us for how we would handle what was a literal season of infertility, which I call
Mm,
a barren land. It was a barren season.
mm,
I learned early on in my marriage that I needed to come to the Lord. We oftentimes want to clench our fists with our prayers. We're the gimme, gimme God prayers, where we just hold our fists up to Him, shaking our fists, holding on to the dream. But He began to show me that as we are able to come to Him in our brokenness with our hands up and open, just releasing our dreams to Him, that really is what Psalm 37, verse 4, which is a favorite passage of mine, is about. Delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart. So I thought probably early on that that means spend time with God, delight in His presence, have a friendship with Him, and come at Him with those gimme, gimme prayers, and He'll give us what we want. But
Yep.
what I began to
He's going to give you
realize,
your way.
exactly, what I began to realize is that as I prayed with hands up and open with my desires, my dreams for children in particular, out and open to him, he could either remove those dreams and desires and replace them with something better, or he could begin affirming my desires. He could begin showing me, because what Psalm 37:4 really means isn't he'll give us what we want. What he does is he plants the seeds of his desires in us and makes his desires for us first, our
Mm.
desires for us.
Hmm.
And as I began to grow in this new healing and walking with Jesus over time, and I say over time because it does take time,
Yeah.
he truly began to show me in so many beautiful ways that his plan for us was to be a mom and a dad. Yes, there were going to be struggles. It may not look the way we thought it was going to look, but we would be parents and we could walk out that promise with joy in the waiting. And there's something beautiful about being able to walk in the now and the not yet. I'm walking now with you, Jesus, but I don't yet have what I want. But trusting him enough to walk in that way is a beautiful thing. And so as we began to learn more about our bodies and what was holding us back, we did try infertility for a season, but I decided pretty early on that I wanted, and this is no judgment on anyone who conceives out of medical intervention, because I believe that that is how God brings babies into this world as well, but it was not part of our story. And I began to realize that for us, and my husband affirmed that as well, for us, it was really creating an Ishmael versus waiting for our Isaac, which is that promised child. And I can say that God was so faithful and so specific down to the date of our son's conception, our first adopted son's conception, that I walked in absolute, complete trust in him, even if I didn't understand. And I can share just a bit of that with you if you'd like.
Oh,
Um,
please.
because it really will then show a little bit more of my heart for another particular mother out there that we'll talk about. But in 1992 or three, again, not long after this initial healing began, I was having a quiet time with the Lord, and he showed me a rainbow kind of in this wakeful state as I was waking up one morning. And I remember asking him, why a rainbow? And he said, because a promise will be fulfilled. And it wasn't long after that, I was teaching at a preschool at the time, and I opened a devotional. And the devotion of that day on May 12th in particular was about a promise will be fulfilled and a gift will be given. And I read it, and it was all about these parents who'd been waiting for a child. Well, I began to just believe and journal that God was speaking, and he was showing me that there were going to be children in our future. And over the course of the next couple years, he used May 12th very specifically to remind me that he had a plan, and it included kids and children for us. It would be weird things like in the movie Evan Almighty, where like this flashing of the alarm clock refers to like a Genesis passage about Noah's Ark. I don't know if you've seen that movie,
Uh-uh.
but I would wake up at 5:12, or I would look up at a billboard and there'd be like a date, 5:12. It was just this
Oh.
plain theme. Well, in 1996, my husband and I were getting ready to leave Lexington, Kentucky and move somewhere, but we didn't know where we were going because he had finished medical school and was getting ready for his residency. And it was kind of like Abraham when God's going to call him away, or Abram at the time, to an unknown place. And Abram's and Sarai's story really became very symbolic for me because of the promise that they were waiting for. And one morning, it was a morning in later in May of 1996. I was praying, and the Lord led me to Genesis 18, which is the story about the three visitors coming. And they say to Abraham, by this time next year, Sarah will give you a son. And Sarah laughs because she's thinking, I'm old and this isn't really going to happen. My husband is old. I'm old. No way. But the Lord reminded me, he said, what was Mother's Day just a few weeks before? And I said, it was May 12th. And he said, the promise will be fulfilled. So this was 1996. And I began to walk into the next few months believing that he was saying that by that time next year, 1997, we would either be pregnant, have a child, or know something about this child. So we moved to Greenville, South Carolina, where we lived for 5 years when my husband was in medical training. And I was teaching school at the time, and I kept walking in faith that there was going to be a baby or a sign of a baby in the coming months. And May 12th of 1997 came and went, and there was no baby, there was no pregnancy, and I had no idea what God meant. But as I mentioned earlier, I knew he was faithful, and I
Hmm.
knew that he had spoken. Well, we decided to give it the rest of the year, and in 1998, pursue adoption if nothing else had happened. And sure enough, on January 2nd, which was a Friday, I went to the office of a friend now, at the time, someone I'd heard of, Carrie Urim, who ran an adoption ministry called The Special Link. And we sat down and began to talk about what you have to do to get that ball rolling. Well, we heard just a couple weeks later, after making birth mother portfolios and sending out birth mother letters and portfolios to attorneys and adoption agencies, that there was a birth mother in Greenville, in Columbia, South Carolina, who had planned on parenting, but she changed her mind and was placing for adoption, but was due the early part of February. And so, long story, we met with her, we signed the papers, we began that relationship. The sweet birth mother who'd gone through this entire pregnancy with very few people even knowing she was carrying this child. And on February 3rd, our son, Dorian Samuel, whose name, gracious gift of God for whom we prayed, was born.
Hmm.
He goes by Ian. And it wasn't long after that Cindy affirmed that his conception was on May 12th of 1997. So God was so specific that in a little more than a year, or by this time next year, you will have a son. He was affirming, one, that life begins at conception, because he was saying your son will be alive in her womb in a year. He also was so true to his timing. It was May 12th of 1997, 1 year later. And we were able to walk into that with just such joy. And then eventually, even share with Cindy more specifically about what it means to have a relationship with Jesus. And she came to Christ. So that is one story of my three children, which are all miracles in my eyes. But it was such a beautiful way to open our eyes to this relationship you can have as adoptive parents with birth mothers, and to really support life and to support those women who choose life when it would be much easier, oftentimes, because the circumstances are often difficult, to choose abortion, to terminate a pregnancy. And so I see birth mothers as the most beautiful heroes out there.
Absolutely. So you still maintain relationship with her, probably.
We do. We have ongoing relationships with all three of our birth children's biological mothers, varying relationships with them just because of where they live or their circumstances, or because our older children now choose that. We've had some relationship with birth fathers as well, not as much, but we have our middle child, our son Jacob, has an ongoing relationship with both his birth mother and his birth father, but they live on the West Coast. But our son Ian's birth mother in particular, she now is working as a social worker, and she works in hospice care at a nursing home. But for years she has done pre and post placement studies. She works with birth mothers herself. She's able to really empathize with other women who have gone through or are going through what she has gone through. And she is such a beautiful advocate for birth mothers. And we love her so much. Her name is Cindy. And ironically, her last name is Abrams.
Oh,
Isn't that funny?
so is there a ministry out there for birth moms who are maybe, down the road a little bit and they do need their heart ministered to?
Absolutely. Unfortunately, there are not a lot I'm not aware of a lot of ministries, but there is one called bravelove.org. It's a ministry that really wants to support birth mothers, to support life, the life that birth mothers are choosing to give, and really offer the kind of emotional, spiritual support that oftentimes is needed for these women who,
Yeah.
even if they've chosen, no matter the circumstance that brought them to the place they choose to carry for 9 months and then place with a waiting family, there's always heartbreak in that. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter how much they know this is the right thing, how much they're going to be able to go forward with their dreams. You're giving a part of yourself away. And that's not
Yeah.
to say we don't like to use terminology like giving up or giving away a baby. We place a baby with a waiting family. That's the way we would word that. But it's always, no matter how beautiful the circumstance, it's still hard. And she goes, I remember when we left the hospital with Ian and Cindy, got a ride from the attorney back to her college dorm, and she was no longer pregnant with this child. And it was
Yeah.
hard. She's expressed to me that there was a loneliness and a loss there, and you grieve that.
Yeah. Well, and her body was still talking about it
Absolutely.
for weeks and weeks and reminding her about what she had gone through. I am going to put a link for that website in the show notes. And I think also if this is something that someone would want to look into more, I think just contacting your local crisis pregnancy center, that might be the best first step because they do maybe know other resources local to you to get that sort of support.
That's a beautiful thing to do. Yes.
Maureen, I always love to touch on community. You know, were there people that blessed you? Were you hungry for community? And I'm even thinking about that birth mom. She needs community too. So, what insight can you give us there?
Well, I am a firm believer in friendship. And when
Mm,
I hear the word community, we can think of all kinds of things, support groups, church groups.
mhm.
I love women. I love to be a connector of women to other women. I will tell this. When I was a young girl, my sister and I, our mom had a picture of Jesus up on the wall in our childhood home. And if we had a prayer request, she taught us to write it on a piece of paper and she would tape it behind this picture of Christ as kind of a casting it over to him to trust him for the answer. And when the answer would
Beautiful.
come, it was beautiful. She would either write the answer out or we would and put it up there, or we would take that prayer request down as a sign that he had answered. And when I was newly married, again, my husband was wonderful. He is wonderful. But, women need women. And I believe God created us for community beyond just our spouse. And I was lonely in my early 20s after being married, not because my husband wasn't wonderful, but because he's a man and he was busy. And men and women in relationship maritally speak differently than a good girlfriend. And I began to do what my mom had taught me to do. And I had this picture that hung on my bedroom wall above my desk of two girls walking hand in hand. And I put a prayer request behind there, just asking Jesus to bring me a friend. And it really was not long after that, God answered that prayer through a beautiful friend named Sharon, who, ironically, while I'm going through infertility, she's having her first and second and third child, which was, I had to deal with those things too, but that was
Yeah,
good.
that's a little hard. Yeah.
She taught me so much about friendship. So God brought this beautiful friend answering my prayer for a friend named Sharon, and she just journeyed with me, and it was just one of those seasons of my life where I was still healing, and she was very instrumental in that. That kind of birthed in me just a desire for that community with women. And so I began to either attend or lead Bible studies in my church or community with other women. We didn't have to have the same background. We didn't have to have the same brokenness to understand that we were meeting as these beautiful creatures of God, women, to grow in Christ likeness. And so that has always been extremely important to me to receive from, but also to pour in to women in small groups, in discipleship groups, in Bible studies. And so that has been something I know that God has used women in my life to really heal some broken places. And I pray He's used me to do the same in their lives. Yes. And with regard to birth mothers, just being able to have that relationship, for example, with Cindy, our son Ian's birth mother. There have been times where she's going through a difficulty in her job or in her marriage, and she'll just call me and we'll talk on the phone. We'll pray together. There's endless beauty and strength, I believe, when women join together in Christ to become more like Him and to grow more like Him. And so I'm a
Mm.
very firm believer in community, in discipleship, and in just friendship.
What an amazing friendship has formed from that. You guys have that shared bond of your son, and it is knit you together.
Yes, so beautifully. So, with these friendships, both with the answer to prayer long ago of Sharon, and with, for example, my beautiful son's birth mom, Cindy, what I found is we all have brokenness. We all have places where we're looking to the world, to others to tell us that we're enough, to tell us we're valuable. It doesn't matter who we are. It doesn't matter how long we've been journeying with Jesus. There do come times where we need to hear Jesus say, turn around. And I guess I would really want your listeners to just be reminded that He is there saying those very words. He wants to not have you see yourself in such a limited way that you're looking inside a window of a building, and that is the totality of life and what He has for you. He wants you to turn around to see the freedom, the endless freedom that comes from walking with Him in an ongoing relationship. And again, relationship with Jesus means that we not only share with Him and talk to Him, but we also receive from Him. And that takes being quiet, doesn't it? And I
Yeah.
know that someone we both know recently has said that these words, that prayer is not so much about our answers, but it's about access to the God of this universe. And what a privilege that Janet McHenry remind us of, to be able to go to the one who created it all and who
Mm.
wants to take us right where we are, broken as we are, and make something beautiful and use us
Mm.
to pour into the lives of others, to encourage others, and to help grow others into Christ likeness.
Mm. She has a wonderful way of explaining that, doesn't she? I will be posting in the show notes my interview with Janet McHenry, where we talked about prayer, and probably a few more episodes that are of interest about adoption, about prayer, things like that. So yeah, so make sure you check the show notes this week. This has been so wonderful, Maureen. I wonder if you could pray for our listeners and for the weeks coming ahead. And then when we get done with that, I'm going to find out where to find you on socials.
I'd be very happy to pray. Father, thank you so much for who you are and who you have called us to be. Your word, which is a lamp to our feet and a light to our path, our sword of the Spirit, our weapon against the enemy of this dark age, is filled from cover to cover with promises and with people who've lived out those promises imperfectly. They're reminders to us that we can live that way. Each one of us has been called to be a woman of biblical magnitude, to be like the women we've read about in your word. Father, it doesn't happen overnight. It certainly could, because you're capable of all things. But you've called us, you've invited us into a journey with your son, Jesus. And it's as we walk with him day by day, as we walk with you, both listening and talking with you and to you, that we grow in that Christ likeness, that we can shine the light that you've given us, that you shine in and through us, that this dark world needs. And I just pray that anyone out there who is walking in a place right now of brokenness will see herself as something beautiful, and that no suffering in her life will be wasted, but you will work all things together for good because she loves you and is called according to your purposes. May it be so for each one of us. Be with all those women out there who are heroes because they're birth mothers carrying babies to term, to place with waiting families who are waiting for their dreams, dreams you've planted in their hearts to come true, to be birthed because of these birth mothers. And I praise you for that. And I pray you will bless each and every one of them as well as the babies they carry. We pray this in your son Jesus' holy name. Amen.
Amen. I have a picture in my mind of the picture you described with two women walking hand in hand. And it is a beautiful thing. We are not meant to do this life alone. And so I think, Maureen, you would welcome some friends to visit your website, to find you on socials. And I'm guessing you're the kind of girl who will reply to messages. So tell me where they're going to find you.
I am not on broad social media. I am on Facebook, and that's where
Okay.
I do a lot of my ministry with microblogging and encouragement. I also have a regular blog. I typically write twice a month at Penning Pansies. It's where I help point readers to the extraordinary character of God found in the ordinary things of life. Again, that's Penning Pansies. And I'm
Mhm.
so excited that my first novel, Gideon's book, will be released next spring. It is a story to honor birth mothers. adopted children, and life, the sanctity of life that God speaks of in Psalm 139. And so I just am so excited to see what God will do.
Oh, I'm excited too. Thank you so much for sharing this time with us. I appreciate it. And if I'm not mistaken, you have also joined us over on the Tending Fields Moms group. And so, ladies, connect with us over there. We would love to just invest in your life through prayer and getting to know you, what's on your heart, and be your friend. So, join us. All right. Thank you for being here with us this week, and we'll see you next time. Bye bye. I hope that you've been encouraged or challenged in your faith today, and that something we discussed prompts you to grow deeper in your walk with the Lord. If it has, make sure you tell a friend so they can grow along with you. And if you or a friend would like to be a guest and share about God's faithfulness in your life, please email me at podcast@tendingfields.net. Because when we tell of God's faithfulness, we never run out of stories.
Whatever is true, whatever is noble, think on these things.